awesome guest who I, at the very least, want to be a frequent guest coming on. If I have my way, he's going to be my co-host of this podcast. And may I introduce you, ladies and gentlemen, to my best friend, Chris Raba.
Hey there, everybody. This is Chris Raba. Andrew, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate that.
So when I first told you about this idea that I had for the Geeky Bartender podcast, what did you actually think of it? I mean, I thought that you might have been a little too nice about it, but what do you actually think about the idea of it?
I mean, I'm a huge nerd. You know that, obviously. I'm kind of a nerd about everything that I lay my hands on, or everything I really dig my teeth into, and bartending is no exception. I think that, and this is probably an overbroad definition, but for me, being a nerd about anything, and you can be a nerd about anything, I think, is just really wanting to dig into it, really wanting to learn all you can about it, learning the history, learning why things are X and not Y, why things are this way, not that way, etc. Learning, about how so many different things came together to create that thing. So bartending, cocktail making, spirit making, wine making, beer making, all of it. I've just been voracious in terms of my consumption of knowledge.
It's funny how, in our lifetimes, the word nerd has changed so much. Like, it used to mean, like, the guy in class that you didn't want to talk to, that were antisocial, very just particular about really different things. And now the word has expanded so that you can be a car nerd, you can be a fucking cocktail nerd, you can be almost any type of nerd. What nerd is eventually like turned into a word that just means passionate about something. But yeah. But even when I was coming up with this podcast, I chose the word geeky instead and not nerdy. Why didn't I call this the nerdy bartender? What is different between a geek and a nerd in this context?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have an answer for that right now.
I have an idea. The idea is more just, like when you say that you're a cocktail nerd, that's really specific. But when I say that I'm a geek, it just means that I love a very specific genre of culture. Pop culture, subcultures, so on and so forth. I think the word geek is more broad, and that's kind of what I was going with this. So, obviously, the two of us are both two people that I consider to be geeky bartenders. We both like a lot of the same things. We both read a lot of the same books. By the way, that book that you gave me, the Firefly book, is so good.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we'll talk about that at some other point. But we also like things like Song of Ice and Fire, which is, for us, is what we call it. It's not Game of Thrones, it's a Song of Ice and Fire. Mm-hmm. Star Wars, video games, board games, all sorts of, like, different types of, like, fantasy worlds, sci-fi worlds. I mean, that is, to me, is, like, what, like, the general broad umbrella of the word geek. And in my time, when I was working at the Famous and the Moose Den, I discovered that there is this voracious appetite for someone to bring that style of personality, even, into an atmosphere like a bar. Because when I started doing this, there weren't that many people that were just very open about how geeky they were about everything. And then once I started doing it, I mean, you were. When I used to come in and I used to visit you and David Tran at the Famous, shout out to David Tran, he'll be a guest on here at some point too. You guys used to sit behind the monitor and play Hearthstone and talk about like all sorts of different things, and that was like the first real taste that I got of that. And now we have places like Guildhall, which are completely devoted to it. So this whole idea of the geeky bartender has really exploded over only the last couple of years, and it's really, really exciting. But at the same time, I'm a little annoyed because it's like I know that I'm probably not the first, but I kind of feel like a little bit of ownership of the idea. It's like, I'm the first to do it. I was the first to wear Star Wars shirts in the bar. I know that's probably incorrect, but I mean, I feel like that sometimes.
Right. Well, before we keep diving into this, should we give people a little background, little context about how we met and
we're gonna, but there's something I want to do first.
All right.
So for the listeners, this is a promise that I'm going to make for you. At the beginning of every single episode of the Geeky Bartender, there will be a cocktail. and there will be a cocktail that was being consumed live on the air by both the host and the guest. And today's cocktail, I actually don't even know what to call this thing because this is one of Chris Raba's creations.
It's not actually.
It's okay, it's not. Well, Chris, can you tell me, what am I drinking? What's in my mouth right now?
So this cocktail is called Rome with a View. It was created by Michael McElroy of Attaboy Bar in New York. Attaboy is I would say, world famous cocktail bar. It is in the space formerly occupied by Milk and Honey, which was...
Wait, time out. Is Milk and Honey still there? Or did they move? Did they get like a bigger place? What happened to Milk and Honey?
Milk and Honey moved to a different location, although I heard a rumor that they actually closed. They moved to a bigger location and have since closed, which is unfortunate. But, R.I.P.
I am making a mournful toast if that rumor is true. I hope this is one of those celebrity death hoaxes, because that was on my list of places to go when I was in New York City.
Honestly, I think that Attaboy has kind of captured the spirit of the old Milk and Honey.
Those some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, but honestly, they've had enough modern classics and enough extremely skilled bartenders and bar managers have come out of that space. That is one thing that made Milk and Honey, and I consider Attaboy to essentially be an extension of Milk and Honey. Milk and Honey was one of the craft cocktail bars that really drove the cocktail renaissance in New York City in particular, but in the United States as a whole as well. Some of my favorite modern classic cocktails came out of that. Some of the best bartenders that have won awards, multiple awards in multiple different arenas and gone on to open their own bars, which have then, accrued multiple accolades for their craft cocktail programs. I kind of forgot how I was going to end that sentence, but
well, we're gonna talk very much about like the renaissance of cocktails that we are currently experiencing, but more specifically this particular one. So I know I was the one that brought up Milk and Honey, but this particular cocktail is out of that Attaboy bar in New York. Mm-hmm. And so what is it? What's in it? Why do you like it?
Right. So this the Rome with a View has a base of equal parts Campari and dry vermouth, and that's combined with fresh lime juice and simple syrup, shaken, served in a Collins, and then topped with soda water. It's traditionally ungarnished. If I were going to put my own spin on this, I'd probably do a grapefruit twist on it, just because I think grapefruit with Campari is quite nice. Orange twist would be, lovely as well. And yeah, the reason I like this cocktail is that it is a low ABV summertime crusher. For me, some of the cocktails I like best are bubbly, bitter, and low ABV. Whenever I go into a cocktail bar and I think they know what they're doing, I usually that's the only time that I'll ask for a bartender's choice. I'm very picky about my bartender's choices. And normally that is the first thing that I will tell them is I want something bubbly, bitter, low ABV. This hits all three of those. And I kind of judge a bar based on their bartender's choice, based on, how well they can execute a cocktail based on the descriptors I'm giving them. So normally this is like my pre-meal drink.
Yeah.
I'll get
Actually, Dave Swan said the same thing to me. When a bartender walks into another bar, my routine is that I'm always going to look at the menu first to know what kind of bar that I'm in.
Bingo.
You being in downtown LA, you probably know what bar you're going to walk into just by its reputation. And if a bar has got a reputation for being like a good craft cocktail bar, then yeah, as a fellow bartender, that is one of the I think the fairest way to accurately get an idea of how good it actually is. But at the same time, I'm not going to name which bar this was, but I got a really bad impression of a bar in my hometown that I had to end up revising my opinion for very strongly, because when I ended up going back there, the general manager / head bartender was the one that served me, and the quality of the drink that I got was on a completely different scale. So at the same time, I totally understand why you do that, but at the same time too, that could also just be depending on the bartender.
Right, and I think that is what a bar truly is. A bar isn't just a name and a place. A bar is more so the people that make up the staff.
Amen.
Right? I think that you can take kind of the worst built bar in the worst area with, maybe some not so great clientele, and if you put the right team in that space, they will slowly change the bar culture around them, the bar atmosphere around them, to make it a great place. It may take some time, but I fully believe that you can take the best team and put them in the worst bar, and they will elevate that bar and turn it into something great. Likewise, I think that if you take a bad team, a bad bar team, and we can get into later what defines a good bar team versus a bad bar team, but I think if you took a bad bar team and put them into the best setup bar, they will slowly erode it from the inside.
And I know the two of us can think of plenty of examples of the latter. I know the two of us can, but we're not going to. All right, so going back to the cocktail, in case you guys want a really close metaphor for what Chris is talking about, if you guys drink beer, this cocktail and all the descriptions that Chris gave it is the cocktail equivalent of a session IPA. Which is something that I think that's really funny, because I know you love session IPAs.
That's true. I do. Also, one of my favorite beers, and I think this ties in too for this one specifically, because I could have gone Americano. It's bubbly and bitter and low ABV.
Remind me again, what's in an Americano?
So this is actually, the Rome with a View is actually a marriage between the cocktail families of a Collins or a Ricky and an Americano. So a Ricky is essentially any base spirit, but a hard base spirit, so 40% or 80 ABV.
These would be considered soft spirits for the listeners.
Sorry, 80 proof, 40% ABV. You take a hard spirit base, add lime, simple syrup, and bubble water, and you got a Ricky variation. If it's lemon, then it's Collins. I'll stop talking about cocktail families right now because it's its own other rant.
Yeah.
And then an Americano is sweet vermouth, Campari, and soda water, and ice and a Collins. That's it. So this is a marriage between those two. Probably we should go into defining what Campari and dry vermouth is. Just, so people know what we're dealing with here.
I mean, at this point, I'm pretty sure that you can find Campari and dry vermouth in basically any bar. As long as the bar that you're keeping it at actually refrigerates their vermouth. That's a really big tell if the place that you're at isn't refrigerating their vermouth.
Yeah.
But, at least I can take this one. Or at least I can take vermouth. Vermouth is a type of fortified wine, and dry vermouth is distilled from white wine. And not distilled. It's not distilled. Sorry, that was. I know. I could see you catching me right there. But dry vermouth is fortified from white wine, and sweet vermouth is fortified from red wine. If I'm not mistaken, there's other things that go into it. Part of the fortification process.
You are mistaken. In the vast majority of cases, sweet vermouth is also white wine based. However, it has a much darker color. Based on the botanicals that are infused into it, and usually caramel or caramel coloring or both, which is the sweetener in sweet vermouth, and imparts like a dark caramel sugar will impart a dark color to it. Dry vermouth. So
I'm learning here right along with you guys.
There are some exceptions to that. Barolo Chinato is a style of sweet vermouth. Although some people would argue that Chinato is its own distinct category, but whatever. That's based off of Barolo wine. It's considered kind of an elevated more elegant form of sweet vermouth. It's certainly more robust, and that's Barolo based.
What is the fundamental difference then in terms of the ingredients? Because I know what dry vermouth and sweet vermouth taste like. They don't taste anything alike. Except for there's like a very small hint of grape in both of them. So what would be the fundamental difference between the two of them?
The fundamental difference is the amount of sugar, as well as the the force of the botanicals, the presence of the botanicals and aromatics used. Traditionally, dry vermouth is very lightly aromatized, right? Like the infused botanicals are very subtle, and as the name implies, it is dry, right? It has very little sugar. And then sweet vermouth has much more robust flavors to it, much more robust like infusions.
There's also a much greater variety of diversity of what sweet vermouth can taste like.
Yes, I think so.
To use your words, not mine, and you're way more particular about your vermouths than I am. Most dry vermouths essentially taste the same. Like there's not as anywhere near as much variance in terms of their flavor as there is in sweet vermouth.
I would say so. For the big brands, for the most prevalent brands of dry vermouth, they don't taste all that different, honestly. I know that might piss a lot of people off, namely probably, some brand reps. But in my experience, the vast majority of dry vermouths that you can find taste really similar. The differences are subtle at best. And I think that has to do with the applications of them in general, right? Dry vermouth is most popular in a martini. So with a vodka martini, if you have a flavorful vermouth,
I can already see where you're going with
it's going to crush the vodka, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be a light, delicate cocktail. And the same thing with a gin martini. You want to taste the gin botanicals. You don't necessarily want to taste the modifier, the adjunct, that's added to it. Dry vermouth is mostly just to lighten it up.
Well, this brings me to a really wonderful segue. At this point, I thought we were already going to be moving, but we're staying on bartending because this is going so well. When you're building a cocktail, the way that I like to summarize it is that when you're building a cocktail, you always want to have your base, but then you also have your modifiers. And a modifier is anything you're doing to, in layman's terms, doctor the base. Because your base is your spirit. A lot of people just drink their spirit by themselves. But the cocktail is going to be modifying the flavor of whatever that base spirit is. So technically, a vodka soda is a cocktail because that's a cocktail that's got more than one modifier in it. It's got ice, which is dilution, and also the coldness of it changes the flavor. And then you've got soda, and all those different things change the way that vodka actually tastes. I mean, I can already see because you're like, well, with vodka and soda, it's a little different because vodka doesn't taste like anything anyway.
Yeah, it depends on the vodka. Okay, I'm going to just back up a little bit, kind of broaden our perspective. I think that defining a cocktail, like what counts as a cocktail, is a very hard thing to do. I think that it's important to realize that we're still dealing with alcohol here, and alcohol has a tendency to make things fuzzy. So in terms of alcohol history and defining a cocktail, I think it's harder to do than you might think. I think that trying to draw hard black and white lines around it may actually create more inaccuracies and create more problems than it solves. But
Chris, to quote Captain Barbosa, these aren't rules, they're guidelines.
They're more like guidelines. Yeah, there's a lot of fuzzy gray borders when it comes to cocktails. But, in general, you need something. You need booze, you need ice of some, or I'd say dilution of some kind, and then you need some kind of modifier, even if it's something as simple as soda water. because soda, the bubbles, right? Carbonation is going to change the texture. It's going to influence how you perceive the flavors and aromas. There's a lot going on there, chemically and biologically.
Plenty of people, I think, underestimate the potency that is carbonation. I mean, even plenty of cocktail nerds underestimate just what carbonation does. There's a reason why you get that feeling when you're drinking a soda, because the carbonation hits your mouth and it hits your body, and that's just a natural reaction that it does. You don't do that with, like, if you're just having, like, you know, whiskey on ice. I don't say at the end of it. Well, sometimes I do, but that's more like out of my own conscious effort.
Right. Carbonation adds a sense of refreshment, and I think that what's key about that sense of refreshment is dryness at the end of the palate. Think about drinking a flat Coke versus a fresh, like, carbonated Coke.
I mean, you can already, in my head, flat Coke is bad, good, fresh Coke is good.
Right, and why is that? Why does flat Coke taste so much worse than a fresh Coke? And that's because of the carbonation balances the sugar. You get sugar up front, the beginning of your sip, and then carbonation, that texture imparts a sense of dryness, of drying out the palate, and then making your palate ready for yet another sip. That if you have a flat Coke, it just tastes syrupy. It just tastes clingy and cloying, and you don't want to take another sip. It makes it far less enjoyable because there's no balance there.
There is a reason why in the Midwest they call it soda pop, or in some places just pop, because that is a really nice word to describe what carbonation does to anything that's liquid that you're consuming. It makes it pop. I'm going to give credit to where credit's due. That's a very common word that's being used to describe it. So, you know, Chris, you and I can go back and forth about cocktails and bartending, and we didn't even get into any of the crazy stories that you and I could tell. Maybe we'll have time for one of those, but
I mean, that's why you created this podcast, right?
Yeah, we're gonna have time to get into a lot of the ridiculous stories. So if you like what you guys hear so far about the bartending aspect of this podcast, then you guys are going to feel right at home. But there is another aspect of this podcast that I did want to spend some time on, because I can already feel us running away with this, just going on just bartending. This is awesome. The other thing that they did want to talk about is that this is the Geeky Bartender, and so, or I'm not going to just have bartenders on here like Chris, although I would love to have more geeky bartenders. If I could just turn this into a podcast where I'm just talking to other geeky bartenders, I would not be unhappy. But the other thing that I want to talk about is geek pop culture. And I did have a topic that I did want to talk to you specifically about today. And I know there's something that you want to talk about too. But I want to go somewhere that is a very exciting place for me to be right now, that I think more people should know about, more people should care about. And that is the world of esports. And so for those of you that do not know what this is, and if you're listening to the Geeky Bartender and you don't know what esports is, well then let me be the man to tell you. Esports is short for electronic sports. It is basically competitive video gaming. And it has exploded over the last few years. Like, there's even a Netflix little mini documentary about it already. It's been popular now for about 20 years. No, more like 20 years, because we're going back to Quake. Like, Quake would probably be the first big game that got big, and then even before that, you had Street Fighter tournaments in arcades. But the internet and streaming services has allowed the accessibility of esports to explode in a very, very real way. And so I want to ask you, Chris, how did you get into esports?
Well, that'd be you, Andrew. You got me into esports.
But it started from somewhere, right? There is a particular game that we both played that allowed us to get into it.
Right, and that's Starcraft. Starcraft is an RTS, real-time strategy video game that takes place in, it's sci-fi. It takes place in a future in which all of the prisoners and criminals from Earth were exiled to another planet. And
Space Australians is one of the best ways that I've heard them described.
And there they create their own civilization, and they encounter two alien species.
And they fight.
And they fight.
And this game is all about controlling your particular race. There are 3. There are Terran, which are the humans, like, cyberpunk humans in the future. You've got the Protoss, which are like this really advanced telepathic race that use a lot of like plasma beams and like all kinds of really cool stuff. And then you've got the Zerg, which are basically more or less based on the Tyranids from Warhammer, if you guys have ever played Warhammer 40k.
Or the bugs from Starship Troopers.
Or the Xenomorph from Alien. Is more the horrifying, like, insect, not human aliens. And so you take one of these races and you play one-on-one against your opponent. They've got different units, they've got different play styles, different strategies, but fundamentally the game is very fair, despite the fact that all the races are very different from one another. And so where this gets to esports is you've got one person on each side going one-on-one, controlling each of their own armies, and it's a wonderful dance of dexterity, strategy, awareness, reactions. The way I've described it before that I think you like is that it's chess played at 100 miles an hour. And it is such a fun thing for me to play, and only around 2010 did I start to really get into the competitive aspect of it online. And mostly at the time, those games were coming out of Korea, but then they started coming out then I started seeing players playing each other like at high levels, like, down the street. Like, it got everywhere. And now esports and Starcraft 2, to its credit, probably was the first big game that exploded the Twitch streaming era of esports that we're currently living in right now. Nowadays, you got things like Fortnite, you've got things like Rocket League, League of Legends, and Dota 2 are still really huge. There are tons of these esports that are out there. But I know Starcraft is close to home for you and I.
Right, because we started playing, in 6th grade?
Maybe 6th, maybe 7th. It was when we brought the demo discs, and I think it was Austin. Yeah. Austin brought the demo discs into the computer lab.
Yeah, I remember that. But I think what makes StarCraft different is that it is South Korea's national sport.
Officially, soccer is their national sport.
Oh, really?
Officially.
I'm sorry.
Officially. No, but it is so widely...
I've been misinformed.
But it is such a widely held conception because that's how big StarCraft is in Korea. It's so big, in fact, that they sell out major sports arenas for their tournaments. Like, if you guys want to do that, if you guys have any interest in just what I'm talking about here, Google StarCraft Korea Arena or anything of that nature, and you will find enormous crowds that turn out to this. And it's actually not always a good thing, too, at least in my opinion, being mostly a StarCraft 2 guy these days, because StarCraft 2 never picked up the level of hype in Korea that StarCraft 1 did. But StarCraft 1 is still very prevalent. It's still very fun to watch. One of these days, I'm going to get you into StarCraft 1 the way that we're both into StarCraft 2. But, so, let me ask you, though, what do you like about it? Because I'm the one that was really got into it in the first place because I was a big StarCraft 2 player. But what do you like? Like, why you don't even play StarCraft 2?
Right. Well, for me, there's more variance than any other spectator sport.
And you're including real sports in this.
Yes, I am. Because I'm not... Now, I think that there is immense skill to be had, immense skill present in every major spectator sport. Baseball, soccer, basketball, football, all of it. There's a ton of talent.
It's one of the main reasons I love the Olympics, because if there's a sport out there, there is someone that is dedicating their life to being the best in the world at it. And you're always going to get that with like any activity. And you know what? When we're talking about our previous thing, there's somebody out there that's a dragon boat nerd. Because that's what they do. Like, they dedicate their entire life around the study of... I think it's called Dragon Boat. It's like Dragon Boat or Dragon Rowing. It's like one of the big speedboat ones with like all the like five dudes or girls, and they're just speedboating. I think it's called...
It's not crew? It's not just called crew?
I think it's called Dragon Boating. I'll have to look that up later. But you're saying.
So, the thing is that most sports are based on physical skill, physical talent, and physical dedication. And if you are, if you're 5'6", 5'7", you're not going to play professional basketball. Doesn't matter how much you love it. Doesn't matter how much you try. Like, doesn't matter, how often you practice. You are simply not going to play at that professional level because you are physically unable.
I'm going to blow your mind because Isaiah Thomas is only, I think, around 5'9", and Muggsy Bogues was even shorter than that. So I see your point, and everyone sees your point, but as a basketball fan, because I'm not just an esports fan, I am a sports fan, I'm a big basketball fan too. Lakers. There have been some notable exceptions to the tall person rule, but I see where you're going with this. There's a level of detachment that you have when you're looking at someone like LeBron James, and you're like, man, I admire everything about what he does, and that's part of the reason why people love basketball. Is because you're able to see people do things that don't even look human half the time.
Right. But with esports, it's a completely level playing field. There's no segregation of gender, or at least there really shouldn't be, because it doesn't matter. There's no you're not limited by your physical ability 99% of the time. Right? Obviously you need use of your eyes, ears, and fingers. So, that does count some people out. But by and large, it doesn't matter how young or old you are. It doesn't matter your race, your gender, none of it. Your physical ability is, by and large, inconsequential. If you are good, you are good. If you practice, you get better. If you, the level of dedication that you're willing to put into it, you'll see returns on that. And the fans, they don't care what you look like. The fans, are not going to judge you based on that. It's purely how good are you at this game. And that's one of the things I really love about it. One of the highest level professional players, Scarlett, is a trans female, and she is incredible at this.
She's
game.
in Code S this season.
She's one of my favorite players to watch, and honestly, I didn't even I didn't know that she was a trans player until you pointed it out. I was just like, oh man, this girl's really good at this game. And she's of the players out at the top level, she's so much fun to watch.
She is, isn't she? She's got a really arrogant personality in the way that she plays. Not Sasha, she is not arrogant at all. But the way that she actually plays has a little bit of an edge to it, doesn't it? You could tell that it's Scarlett that's playing, without even seen the nameplates on there.
Yeah, she's got this little smirk.
Yeah.
Especially when she wins, she gets this little smirk that I think, especially South Korean players are most of the time stone cold, just stone faced.
That's a common misconception. But yeah.
They're hard to read.
They've got good poker faces. Let's put it that way.
Bingo. Whereas Scarlett, when she wins, when she's executed something that's really badass, and she's like, fuck yeah, I just did that. She gets this little smirk, and it's really endearing. Yeah.
You're going to love this story if you don't already know it. There was a tournament, I believe it was an MLG. I haven't looked it up, but I believe it was an MLG where Scarlett was playing against Dongrigu. And this was DRG. This was DRG when he was still at his peak. Now DRG's come back, by the way. If you didn't know that, DRG's in Code S this season. But we'll talk about Code S in a second.
Okay.
But this was back at MLG, one of the foreign tournaments, and Scarlett in the mid, she played game 1, ZVZ, lost. She did something that has never been done in StarCraft 2 before, and to my knowledge has not been done since. In game 2, she played Protoss.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
She switched races?
In the middle of the series.
That's unheard of.
And in a lot of tournaments now, it's against the rules.
Really?
But it wasn't against the rules there. She switched to Protoss, and I'll never forget this. I think she did a Stalker Void Ray build and wiped the floor with him in that game. And before that, she had been on the record complaining that the Zerg versus Protoss matchup was too difficult or imbalanced or whatever. And so to see her pull that off after talking like that to Dongregu at the height of his powers, oh man, in typical Scarlet fashion, on Twitter, she wrote 2 words after that match: easy race. That is one of my favorite Scarlet stories.
I think that is a good way to tell a great player. More than just a great player in any sport or competition, but a great mind. And that is, if you do something and they immediately say, this is now against the rules and you can't do it, then, like, you're a fucking badass.
So Scarlet
You force them to change the rules because you found a way around the problem. That's something that, for me, I admire greatly, is not taking a hammer to a brick wall, but finding a way around the brick wall. And then they're like, well, that's not in the spirit of the game. You can't, do that.
No, it's just, so there were people that were doing that before. TLO is very well known at the beginning of Starcraft for doing that. I think more what it was the fact that she did it in the middle of a series. I think like after that, the rules were changed that before the series begins, you have to declare what race you are. And now I think Blizzard has mandated the rules that you need to, for the duration of a tournament, need to have one race selected. And I think that's mostly just so that people can identify what player plays what, and it gets a little confusing after a while. But one of the main reasons why I love, and we're on the right topic because we're talking about Scarlet, is one of the best like examples of this, is that there is a lot of personality in esports. It's one of those things that like I don't think people give it enough credit that don't watch esports, but there is these people that play it, these nerds that play it, they are nerds, they are geeks, but they have a lot of personality and they have a lot of heart. Not all of them. There are some robots like Cyril, who is just very
innovation.
Yeah, by the book. I was going to tell you this, and this is going to segue into Code S. So Innovation played the other night. I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but he was very un-Innovation-like in his demeanor. Not necessarily in his playstyle, because he played his Innovation as ever. But he was just smiling, joking, laughing when he knows he pulled something off. Even Tasteless and Artosis were talking about it. So that was a lot of fun. But Code S has started, and I'm not going to spoil anything for you. And I would love that if you had seen it already, because I'd love to talk about some of these things with you. But oh my god, it has been a doozy so far. These results were not what I was expecting. The results last night, I only managed to watch them this morning, but one of my favorite players, I thought he was done. I thought he was out, and he fucking rallied. And it was so much fun. Dude, this season of Code S is wild. It's already wild, and it's going to continue to be wild. So I can't wait for you to be excited about that.
Yeah, it's hard to see games live if you live in the U.S. just because they play at Korean Standard Time.
Right.
Which is... Do you know how different it is? I don't actually know off the top of my head.
So what I do know is that early morning for us, and when I'm usually catching GSL, it's usually at 2 in the morning Pacific Standard Time.
Jeez.
It's around 2 or 2:30 in the morning. Yeah, but I'm one of those guys that's nocturnal and doesn't have a life. Chris has more of a life than I do, so you can't do that kind of stuff. But they're broadcasting it, I think, early evening or afternoon of the next day is what's going on. So they're just on the other side of the international timeline, or what's that word? The international dateline? Yeah, the international dateline. They're just on the other side of that. So early morning for us across the Pacific is the nighttime for them on the other side. Because it goes from here. It gets later and later from the Pacific Standard Time Zone. So we're talking, we both love this sport. We both love the spectacle of it. And, there's going to be... I'm going to have people on here that are going to talk about League of Legends. Like, I know Adam went to Worlds down at Staples Center that was sold out, and I'd love to have him come on and talk about that. But there is an excitement to esports that makes it an actual genuine, joy to watch competitively live. And I was going to ask you, I know that we both know the answer to this because we've witnessed it, we've experienced it. But is there a way to bring esports into the bar world? the way that sports and bars go together like peanut butter and jelly. Esports, I think, deserves a chance to run with and be right next to the Laker game. I want to be able one of these days to just, in my right field of view, I've got the Lakers and the Celtics, and in my left field of view, I've got Morrow versus Serrell, and both of these things are dreams at this point, because the Lakers aren't going to get back to the finals for a while, and Morrow versus Serrell is never going to happen because bracket luck keeps destroying it. But, so I remember, the first time we knew that this was a thing that was happening. It was a dream before, but it was actually happening. Is we both went to a SoCal Esports, shout out to them, sponsored event at Buffalo Wild Wings.
Yeah.
What was that like? What do you remember about that?
I just remember it being surreal. I remember this giant Buffalo Wild Wings out in the valley, right?
No, it was out in Wake Forest, which is I think it was Lake Forest, which is just north of I think San Pedro. Like it's down deep in like Orange County, which we're in LA, so that's like a good I want to say hour drive from where we live.
Yeah, and it was called Barcraft, right? Yeah. So it was a Barcraft event, and this place, and it was a large Buffalo Wild Wings, was just packed wall to wall with Starcraft fans. And every single TV in there, and there must have been a minimum of 24.
And the in-restaurant audio, don't forget that.
Yeah.
One of the most surreal things to me was going to the bathroom and hearing Tasteless and Artosis while I'm peeing. That was surreal. Talk about surreal.
Yeah, our two favorite casters.
Let's not say our two favorite. The two best. Let's be honest. Even the other casters know this. They're the best.
That's true.
Even the broadcasters from other esports know they're the best.
Yeah, I would agree. So this entire place was packed wall to wall with StarCraft nerds. Every single TV was streaming the live professional StarCraft. They had a special menu with drinks that were StarCraft themed. And I just remember, and this is a bit of schadenfreude, right? But I just remember there was one table
I was wondering if you were going to bring this up.
3 people wearing, I think, Raiders jerseys. Just 3 people, wearing Raiders jerseys, and they looked scared. They were like the people, they were like those people that, journey deep into the Amazon rainforest and get kidnapped by cannibalistic tribal people and are just tied up, watching them do some kind of weird ritualistic dance before they eat you.
You're painting the perfect picture.
That's what their faces looked like. They were like, what is happening? What happened to Buffalo Wild Wings? Where is our sports? Why aren't they showing football? They were just their world was crumbling before their eyes, and they didn't know what was happening, and they were just scared. And
I remember them talking to the server, and she's like, "Oh, don't worry, I'll put this on one TV for you." That's normally the sort of thing that you get when there's a big football game on and you want to watch hockey. I know hockey fans are used to this, where they're getting having to ask to have their sport played. But yeah, I was wondering if you were going to bring up the Raiders fans.
I'll never forget that. And, my tone, the way I talk about it may sound kind of mean, but I feel like nerds have taken so much abuse, ever since people started...
that's why we were talking about the way the word nerd has changed for so many years. There was always a negative oppressive connotation attached to it before that.
So I feel like they've taken so much abuse that, I just think it's only fair
we're using the word abuse very loosely here. I mean, They got to sit down. No one was telling them they couldn't watch football. It's just that they're surrounded by something that is being enjoyed by a vast, larger number of people
that they weren't prepared for. And so I think that nerds won the war. I don't think it was a real war, but nerds won.
No, it is a bit of a culture war, because look at what's going on right now. I mean, ever since The Big Bang Theory aired, and I'm not even giving The Big Bang Theory credit for this, but ever since The Big Bang Theory aired, it seems like everywhere you go is nerd culture everywhere. I just saw Avengers Endgame over the weekend, and it's already made $1.2 billion as of yesterday.
Jesus.
We're talking about something. We're talking about comic books now. Superhero comic books. Do you know what the image of the comic book store looked like? You couldn't just get comics. You had to go to the comic book store. And there's a famous character in The Simpsons that is supposed to show you like everything that is stereotypical about the comic book store. This was something that was really like exclusive to just a certain group of people. And it wasn't exclusive because anyone was excluding anyone. It was just in order to get into this stuff, you had to become a member of the nerds. If people found out you read comic books and loved superheroes, you were a nerd. Yeah. You were labeled as such. And people wanted to keep that secret for a long time. Like, yeah. I remember the comic book store that I went to buy Magic cards. But in order for me to play Magic, I had to go to the back of the school and hang out by the science labs and play Magic back there.
Yeah, what was it? Legacy?
Yeah.
Legacy Comics?
Legacy
yeah,
Comics.
I still remember
it's still there.
It's still there.
It's still there. It's still trudging. Legacy, we love you. I don't spend money there anymore, but I definitely support what you do. But I'm just saying that, like, you've also got Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is based off of a high fantasy novel. Can you imagine that? Yeah. High fantasy is the most talked about subject in the world right now. And I know we can go back to Star Wars in the 70s and like how that took over everything.
Lord of the Rings too.
Lord of the Rings too. But I mean, now that's all that's out there really. Like everything is like some sort of nerd pop culture. You've still got Star Wars going. I'm not going to get into that topic. I'm saving that topic for another podcast. You still got Star Wars going. You still got the MCU is still going to continue after this, although I'm pretty sure that this was a very conclusive ending to everything that has been built up to at this point. DC Comics is doing their thing. Nerd pop culture is everywhere now.
Yeah, it's definitely entered the mainstream, and I think it's pretty much accepted as the mainstream.
I'm still on my rant, and I just remembered this. Anime is getting mainstream now. I know you're not a big anime guy, but like, there's a lot of talk now about like whether or not the fact that anime is getting so popular is actually a bad thing because it's diluting like the creativity of the product. Like there's actually talk about that now because anime is getting so big. And dude, let me tell you something. Like even back in high school, I was a nerd, but I wasn't an anime nerd. I wasn't a weeb. The weebs were a whole different brand of nerd that I wanted very little to do with. I was like, I like Dragon Ball Z, and they were like, yeah, okay. Like
you're not really into anime.
Yeah, you're not really into anime. Yeah, but even that is becoming more and more mainstream now. You've got big releases of like the My Hero Academia movie, which is a movie based off of a really popular anime series right now. It's kind of like this generation's Dragon Ball Z. I'm explaining to Chris, who doesn't know what this is. It's like if Harry Potter and the Marvel Universe met. It's more or less what this is like.
Well,
but that movie was released globally in movie theaters. It didn't make anywhere near as much money as Avengers Endgame did, but it made a lot of money.
Huh.
And it's weird to think that like this is the era that we live in now, where you can go to a mainstream movie theater and you can find anime movies and they're doing well. And to tie this all together, back into the bartending thing, we had that experience at Barcraft in that one year for MLG Orlando. I remember the tournament, it was MLG Orlando. And now you have places like Guildhall who are opening an expansion because they're doing so well. And that place is dedicated to esports, board games, and nerd culture.
Yeah, it's a nerd-themed bar. It looks like... it's named after what? An element in Warcraft. World of Warcraft?
Well, World of Warcraft can't take credit for it. It's like any sort of Dungeons and Dragons-esque, like, questing-based adventure. I'm not even 100% sure if Dungeons and Dragons coined the term, but it's where the guild is. The guild hall. You want to hire the guild? You want to hire members of the guild? You go to the guild hall.
Fair. And their soundtrack, their, like, background music is movie soundtracks, and all they stream on all of their TVs is esports, and they've got a giant board game library, and they're doing really well. They are a bar dedicated to nerd culture, and they're doing really well.
And everyone behind that bar is a geeky bartender. Spencer, if you're listening to this already, I'm coming for you because I do want you on this podcast. I want to talk about way more about Guildhall, because I think Guildhall is a perfect example of things to come. You said that we won the war. I disagree. I'm not saying that we won the war. I'm saying that we're winning the war. and it's continuing. It's a continuous process, and there's going to be more nerd stuff coming, more geeky stuff coming. So I know you're checking the time. Are we running low on time? How are we doing on time?
We're all right.
We're all right on time?
Yeah.
All right. So I did bring that up, but I did want to give you an opportunity. So now that we're on Guildhall, we were talking about board games. You and I, we both play our fair share of video games. I play a lot more, and we both play our fair share of board games. You play a lot more. And we have some differences in opinions on some things, but I want to hear from you as an avid board game fan. Avid. Like, you probably don't know anybody. You listening right now are not as big of a board game fan as Chris Raba is right here.
I mean, it's possible, right? But
why board games?
For me, it has to do with the live social interaction with other human beings.
That's such a weird thing for a nerd to say. He wants to be social with other human beings while he's engaging in his really nerdy activity.
Well, okay, I think about it this way. And this is a lot of just, I suppose, armchair philosophy and not exactly things that I've done hard research on. So take it with a grain of salt. Andrew, when you and I were growing up and we played video games, it was either a LAN party, so like a local area network, right?
With computers, yes.
Yeah, where we're all in the same room. Or we were all gathered around a console, right? Playing GoldenEye or playing Mario Kart or Super Smash Brothers or whatever. So we were all in the same room, and we were able to interact around this game, but also interact directly with each other, with people we knew.
Trash.
Usually talking trash.
Eating chips, having a soda together. Like, Alex and I would be wrestling over who got what spot on the couch, that sort of thing.
But there was a very pronounced social aspect to the game. And with the advent of the internet and with the advent of games that were pretty much only played online, right? I think actually at this point you can't even play a lot of console games as a split screen. You have to.
You know what's
play
funny
online.
about that? I'm loving that you brought that up, because there's a new Halo coming out, and it's advertising that it's bringing split screen back. Because you're right, it's so far gone that it used to be something that was on every game, every console game had some sort of local area multiplayer, and really only Nintendo has kept that going. But now you've got Halo advertising it as though they should be given props for it, but they are, because it's something everyone missed and wants back.
Right. And so with, like I was saying, with the advent of the internet, playing video games got a lot more anonymous, right?
In a really bad way a lot of the times, too.
Right.
We're talking about the 14-year-old Call of Duty fans out there.
With anonymity came a lack of social niceties, right? A lack of courtesy and a lack of consequences. That's where you had, it's the kind of atmosphere that gave rise to swatting, where
That's probably the most extreme example of it, but yeah.
Where you would find out where your opponents lived, usually via some kind of hacking attempt, and you would call the SWAT team on them. You basically call in a bomb threat or call in a terrorist threat and have the SWAT team attack their house so that you could win a video game. Right? Now the thing
They don't even do it to win a video game anymore. They just do it for the hell of it.
Right. So, and I think in that atmosphere, all of this, being social is far riskier than, the risk-reward ratio is such that you don't want to risk it. You turn off your chat. You don't want to interact with people because
Hearthstone has chat disabled. One of the first games I played that did that.
Oh, they disabled it?
Well, no, they've always had it disabled. You had to be friends with somebody in order to chat with them.
Right,
but you couldn't chat with your opponent regularly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I played Hearthstone for a good while. I don't play it anymore, but I played it for a good while, and strangers who I played a game with would occasionally friend request me. And at first I was like, okay, yeah, sure, why not? You know, like somebody to play with. And eventually there were so many instances of you'd friend request them and all they would do is just like spam shit talk. Yeah. And so you just unfriend them. So eventually I just stopped accepting friend requests.
It's so, dude, I could dedicate a whole podcast to this, but what you were talking about truly and deeply saddens me as someone that has been playing online video games for most of my life. I remember my interactions when I was playing Starcraft 1 online on a 56k modem, or playing Diablo 1 online on a 56k modem, begging my parents not to pick up the phone. And I just remember meeting the people back then, and this was unexplored territory for everyone, so everyone was really nice about it. And now people just take it for granted, and they take that anonymity thing as a weapon. Like, this is my permission to be an asshole. And I know we're getting back to board games, but you and I have had a conversation about this before, and I do firmly believe that it is this overuse of online that has taken the fun social aspects out of video games, that has created a demand that is now being met in a very real and a very wonderful way by board games.
Right. I think that with the rise of gaming via the internet, I think that paralleled the rise of board games, right? The rise of, like, niche board games. And when I say board games, I know that...
You're not talking about Risk and Stratego.
Right, I'm not... Stratego's... Yeah. But I'm not talking about Risk, Monopoly, Trivial Pursuit, Scrabble. There's been a couple games usually made by, like, Mattel and Hasbro.
We both love Scrabble. We're both huge Scrabble fans.
There's been a couple games that have always been popular, but most of them are bland by comparison to some of the board games coming out right now. The
same way that Budweiser is bland compared to the wonderful craft beer that we have now. The same sort of thing is happening.
Exactly. People, there was a lot of people that didn't like board games, and that's because, frankly, the majority of board games that you could find 20 years ago, 30 years ago, were really shitty board games. I hate Monopoly. I love board games, but I hate Monopoly.
You know that Monopoly was originally designed as like a critique of capitalism, right?
Right.
Like, it was originally designed not to be fun.
Exactly. And so, and that's because that Monopoly breaks a lot of what are now considered the golden rules of board game design.
This is good stuff. What are the golden rules of board gaming, Chris?
I don't think I can list all of them off the top of my head, and they're not officially sanctioned and written down anywhere, but some of the golden rules of board gaming are no player elimination in a long game. I think that most people can relate to an instance of you're playing Risk, you're playing Monopoly, and you get eliminated. You lose all your money, or you lose all of your territory within the first 45 minutes. This reminds me.
Hey, sometimes it can be a good thing when you're playing Risk at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and you have to hike out of there. Getting eliminated first because everyone ganged up on you worked out pretty well because I got to go to bed a little bit earlier.
That's a whole other story.
That's a whole other story.
I think everybody has that memory of being eliminated 30, 45 minutes, hour in.
And you feel like you wasted your time.
Right, and now all you can do, now you still have to wait another 3 hours for the rest of the people to finish the game. And a lot of the game is so repetitive, Monopoly in particular is so repetitive, that even if you are one of the last players, at the end, you're just done. You're just exhausted. You don't even want to win anymore.
I just want the game to end.
You just want the game to end. It's not fun anymore because there's no challenge. You're not figuring out any puzzles. You're not trying to really strategize anymore. You're rolling your dice. You're moving. You're making the same type of decisions over and over and over again. And after 3 hours, who wants to do that anymore, right? There's a reason writing standards, writing the same thing, doing the same thing over and over and over again for hours is a punishment. So, a lot of people hated board games because they were terrible. And the way I like to describe it to somebody who's not into board games now and who hasn't been exposed to the wide variety, the amazing variety of board games that are out there now, is imagine if the first movies that you ever saw were black and white silent films, and that's all you ever saw for years, is black and white silent films from like the early 1900s.
That's what you would think a movie is.
Right. Eventually you're like, well, screw movies. This is not fun at all, right? This is boring. Like, I don't want to watch movies. And then you just stopped watching movies, and now somebody comes along and says, wait a second, we've got IMAX HD Avengers Endgame, or like these like amazing stories in amazing, like with amazing sound and visual quality. You can watch them 3D now.
I think if you did that to somebody, that you would actually kill them. I think if you had somebody that had only seen silent movies and gave them an IMAX 3D showing of Avengers Endgame, I think you would actually kill them. You would overload all of their senses.
But that's kind of the analogy, or sorry, rather the metaphor that I use for board games now, is that now we're coming out with the IMAX 3D, Ultra HD, high quality, high fidelity sound version of board games, right? Monopoly is obsolete. Old-fashioned Risk is obsolete, right? I would never play those, ever, because there's so many great board games. In fact, there's so many good board games coming out now that I would argue I could quit my job and play a different game every single day of the year, and I probably still wouldn't catch up.
Well, there are people that actually do that. There are people that review board games for like a living, and that's what they do, and they are still able to do it as a career because there's that many new ones coming out every day.
Exactly.
So I know that you do want to talk about one in particular, but I do need to ask you a question since you brought up Monopoly and Risk. So for people that have, because everyone at this point has at least played Monopoly once. You know, it's kind of a rite of passage for most Americans.
A lot of people have.
What would you recommend to somebody who thinks they like Monopoly but doesn't know any better?
That is a good question.
Because I know the one that you originally said, and that's the one that I like, which is Ticket to Ride.
Yeah, Ticket to Ride is a good game.
It's really easy to learn, too.
Yeah. You know, let's see, if you like Monopoly, what would I recommend you play? Well, there's a lot of economics to Monopoly. There's economics, and then there's like kind of strategic placement. I actually think that Settlers of Catan is a really good one.
That's a great one.
That is a good, we call them, board game nerds call them gateway games, right? In the same way that you have gateway drugs.
You also have gateway anime.
Right, there's things that mainstream non-board game nerds can kind of get into. That's the shallow end of board games.
Yeah.
And I think that, let's see, Puerto Rico is an old school
Alex loves that game. I've never actually played it, but I want to.
Yeah, I played it once years ago. Puerto Rico is a good one. I think that any kind of economic engine building game is great. So there's a lot of them out there. But Settlers of Catan is very easy to find. It's pretty easy to learn. It's essentially economics meets craps.
And it also has... I love that he said that because I actually taught Chris how to play craps by comparing it to Settlers of Catan.
Yeah, I learned Settlers of Catan before I learned
craps.
And
it does share the Monopoly tendency for ruining friendships. So, alright, so said Monopoly. What about Risk?
If you like Risk, Risk is a territory control army game. I think... What is a good territory control army game that is... I
mean, Twilight Imperium is probably at the end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, that's the black tar heroin of...
you gotta work up to that.
Yeah. No, it's not black tar. It's the crystal meth. It's like the crystal meth of board games, Twilight Imperium.
I know you love that
Jesus,
game,
it's so good. But it is also insane. Let's see. Small World is nice. That one's fairly easy to find.
I've seen that at Guildhall, but I have not played it yet.
It's a good territory control game. Small World is a good one. I wish that I can... I'm trying to think of my board game.
Would you recommend the Game of Thrones game?
Yes, but that's more complicated than Risk. Small World is much easier to learn.
Well, I mean, when we're talking about, like... I would assume that people that play Risk would be enjoying a little bit more of a complicated game. And you know what? I'm going to answer this question myself. If you like Risk, but you want Risk that is way more advanced, that you play with just one other person as opposed to being ganged up on in Australia, Austin, and Evan, and Michael Doyle, I got a game for you. It's called War of the Ring.
Dude, okay. But War of the Ring
we're still
be the Black Tar heroine.
All right, so we're still in Twilight Imperium's, like, this is the really extreme stuff. But I'm just saying, because this is one of my favorite board games, even though I still have a very bad record against you, it's an excellent board game. And as someone that has played a lot of Starcraft and a lot of strategy games in general, as a strategy game lover, I highly recommend this game.
And War of the Ring is insane.
We played it for 12 hours once, didn't we?
Yeah, 12 and a half was the first game, and that wasn't even including setting up the game itself and reading the rules. By the way, my brother Ryan, actually, he told me that he was watching somebody play that game. And he was like, he didn't know that I had played it. He was describing this game to me. He's like, yeah, it's kind of like Risk, but it's Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, what is it called? And he's like, War of the Ring. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. Like, dude, you're watching somebody play that? Like, all right, settle in. It's going to be a long night.
Yeah, grab yourself a beer or a cocktail. Well, you're right. Your brother's not old enough to drink yet.
Exactly. But I think Small World is a good one. I think that, let's see, what is it? Shogun, War of the Five Rings.
Oh, that's
two different games.
Oh, I already like it.
Shogun, War of the Five Rings is a good one. Man, there's this one by Jamie Stegmaier that is also great. That I can't remember right now. It's an alternate history where they invent mechs in, like, just after World War One. So imagine World War One.
This sort of cyberpunk shit is like one of your weaknesses,
dude. I mean, it's like alternate history, right? It's like, imagine mechs as, it is kind of cyberpunky. It is kind of steampunky. It's like World War One, like, mechs.
I already love it.
And that one is territory control, but it's a lot less like armies clash and a lot more there's a lot more economics. It's not just like roll a dice, smash them up.
In video game terms, we've already talked about our civilization or our macroeconomic builders, because we've talked about Puerto Rico, we've talked about Ticket to Ride, we've talked about Monopoly, and then we've talked about the strategy games. We talked about Risk, we talked about Twilight Imperium, we talked about War of the Ring, we've talked about Shogun. What about for the RPG fans out there? If you're a Legend of Zelda fan, if you're a Diablo fan, if you're a Witcher 3 fan, if you're a Dungeons & Dragons fan, because I know Dungeons & Dragons is probably the holy grail when it comes to, tabletop RPGs, but if you're looking for something that comes in a box and has a board, Chris Raba.
It's hard for me to not say Gloomhaven.
I was inviting you to talk about it.
Right. I could see that. So, Gloomhaven is a dungeon crawler, and Dungeons & Dragons is probably the most famous instance of this. So, I like to say that Gloomhaven is Dungeons & Dragons with structure. Dungeons & Dragons is pretty famously a paper and pencil RPG, meaning that there's been people who've made boards for it and made mods for it.
Oh, Dungeons & Dragons fans are crazy.
They're dedicated. I don't like to say crazy. They're dedicated.
I don't know if they are 100% capable of integrating into society properly. I'm saying that lovingly.
So Dungeons & Dragons has a dungeon master. So you have a person who creates the scenario, and every other player, so they create the scenario, they create the story environment, they create the problems, and they kind of build the world. And then every other player has a character, and that character they build with certain specifications. They create they decide the class of the character, they decide the race of the character, they decide the personality of the character, they decide what skills they have, what their strengths are, and what their weaknesses are. they create a backstory for that character. So you have the dungeon master who creates this rich world, and then you have every other player who creates this rich character. And then those characters form the, like, dungeon group, right? They form the team, and they explore the world that the dungeon master has created. And normally the dungeon master kind of leads them in a couple possible directions, and then it's up to the players to figure out how they overcome obstacles, how they solve problems. And then they basically roll dice to simulate the unpredictable nature of things, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you go to stab the monster with your sword, but you roll a 1, so you end up slipping and the sword falls into your side and, like, wounds you, right? Like, or you go to, like, stab the monster, you roll a 20 on a 20-sided dice, your, sword pierces his eye into the brain of the monster, and you kill him instantly.
Critical hit.
Right?
And all these outcomes, though, and I know that this is something that you said before, but all these outcomes are at the discretion of the dungeon master, because he's the one that sets the whole thing up.
Well, he kind of, there are good dungeon masters and there are bad dungeon masters, and normally they create results that are appropriate, and they have some that are kind of like, they have an outline, so, they're prepared for things. But a lot of times they just have to adapt on the fly. And I think that is one thing that is integral to Dungeons & Dragons is improvisation. A lot of actually improv groups, people that do improv comedy or improv like sketches, in theater, there's a lot of crossover between those fans and Dungeons & Dragons fans, because Dungeons & Dragons gives you very light structure and it encourages improv, right? Like, you're encouraged to take on the personality of your character, make decisions the way they would make decisions, not necessarily the way you as a human being would make decisions, but how does my
otherwise known as the role play in role playing
exactly game. Like, how does my ogre warrior deal with this problem, right? So you will, I think, if you enjoy improv, you will enjoy Dungeons & Dragons. If you are good at improv, you will be good, air quotes around good, at Dungeons & Dragons. For me, that is not me. Like, I don't really enjoy improv. I occasionally do, but I don't really enjoy it that much. I'm not good at it. I've tried playing Dungeons & Dragons, and it doesn't appeal to me. Nothing wrong with it. It's created an amazing culture, and it's an amazing game, right? But it's not my kind of game. Gloomhaven incorporates a lot of that fantasy dungeon crawling environment, but there's structure. I can still build out my character the way that I want. I can still create personalities for them. There's still multiple instances of decision making with uncertain outcomes. And there's still plenty of randomness that can be mitigated in certain ways. But there's structure, meaning you don't need a dungeon master. Every player is playing the game. The game itself is trying to kill you.
In a sense, who's the guy that created it? Because I know you know his name.
Isaac Childress.
In a way, Isaac Childress is the dungeon master. You're trying to beat Isaac Childress.
Although he had a bunch of contributing designers, but this, so you are exploring this world. Gloomhaven is all right. Just to back up a second for a little bit, the opening premise is that you are a group of mercenaries that meet in a tavern called the Sleeping Lion in the middle of a town called Gloomhaven, and you decide to band together, to basically combine forces in order to seek your glory and basically act as mercenaries, right? Like, we're stronger together. And we're out for ourselves, and we're not beholden to any higher power, but we're out for ourselves, but we're stronger together than we are alone. And what's amazing about this game is how many different branching story paths there is, there are. You make ethical choices. You make decisions where you are not sure of what the outcome is going to be, and once you make that decision, there is no going back. There are no do-overs. If you made a wrong decision, well, you live with it, and you go from there. There are a lot of times where you have to make a decision as a group, and there may be a lot of disagreement about which way you go. There's also a lot of decisions you make as an individual, things that you have hidden objectives, both in the short term and the long term, that you're not allowed to share with the group. Sometimes those hidden objectives mean that you are at odds with somebody else and their hidden objective. And so, they're ultimately your mercenaries. Sometimes it's better to fight on the side of good. Sometimes it's better to fight on the side of evil. It just depends. Where do you think you can profit? And so there have been a lot of times where you're just at an impasse with your fellow players, and ultimately you're mercenaries. So there have been a lot of times where it comes down to, okay, we're going to agree to disagree. Let's see who gets it first, right? You want that treasure chest? I want that treasure chest. Let's see who gets it first. And so you just go after it. Sometimes you play nice, sometimes you play dirty. And you will encounter different options, right? You will explore different parts of the world based on the decisions you make. But every time you make a decision that opens one door, you're potentially permanently closing another door. So it means that the stakes are really high, right? The stakes of the game are high, but that also makes them feel meaningful. So you feel like you actually accomplished something because you are permanently changing the game state, right? You are permanently changing the world of this game.
You've told me before that you've built you're helping to build Gloomhaven, so Gloomhaven looks a lot different now than it did when you first started the game.
Exactly. You are
Gloomhaven being the town.
Right. Gloomhaven. You are uncovering different parts, and you are actively building the game itself. But the one thing, and I know I'm oversimplifying, but the thing that I don't like about playing Dungeons & Dragons, besides the fact that I'm not good at improv and I don't particularly enjoy it, is everything kind of feels at the Dungeon Master's discretion, right? What happens when I roll this dice and try to do this thing? It's up to the Dungeon Master, right? What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do or try to do? It's up to the Dungeon Master. Whereas, how strong is this monster? What does this monster do? It's up to the Dungeon Master. Whereas in Gloomhaven,
monster stats, as far from what I know, monster stats is one of the few things they can't really mess with too much.
That's true.
There's a giant rule book that's got all the different things in it. That's why when the kids in Stranger Things summoned the Demigorgon, they were all freaked out because they all knew what the Demigorgon was before they summoned it.
They didn't summon it, right?
Well, they encountered it.
Yes. But the thing is that, yeah, you're not allowed to mess with the stats, but as the Dungeon Master, I can decide who this monster attacks.
Yeah.
Right? This crazy, this dragon that I'm controlling. Is the dragon smart? I know to attack the healer first, right? Because the healer has the least, amount of defense, and without the healer, the warrior can't last.
To quote Neferi from World of Warcraft, kill the one in the dress!
So, but does the dragon itself know to do that, right? Is the dragon smart enough?
This is you thinking, but you're disassociating the dragon from the Dungeon Master because you're playing against the Dungeon Master.
Right.
You're not able to make that distinction yourself.
So that's... And sometimes, I can see how a lot of friction is caused when the Dungeon Master does something that, sometimes shit happens where the Dungeon Master obliterates your character, right?
Yeah, I've read stuff like this. I've read some horror stories online about how Dungeon Masters just don't want a person to be playing with them, so they just kill them.
and so I don't like that. Because...
Well, like you said, there's good dungeon masters and bad dungeon masters. A good dungeon master is not going to do that to somebody.
Fair. But the game itself, all of the monsters have AI, right? They all have decks.
So now we're talking about Gloomhaven.
Yeah, sorry, you're right. In Gloomhaven, all of the monsters have AI. All of the things are preset, right? You're playing the game. If you're upset at the game. You're not you don't really get upset at your fellow players.
Now, I don't play Gloomhaven, but I do know how to feel frustration towards a co-op game, because another co-op game that you and I both love is Arkham Horror, and I do remember just being very upset at that game. We have this inside joke now about never going to the woods.
Right, exactly.
Because every single time I go to the woods, something really bad happens to me.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you. So everything that Chris is talking about, if you guys have ever played an online RPG, this should all sound really familiar to you, right? It's one of the things that I love talking... One of the reasons why I love how happy you are with Gloomhaven and how excited you are is because you're getting to experience a lot of the same things I experienced when I was doing my online RPGs for the very first time. But I gotta ask you, so it operates like campaigns, right? It was like a singular campaign?
Yes. So there is a central campaign, and then the campaigns kind of split off. The central campaign is you start, and the first person to hire you is this character called Jaxera. And she's basically hiring you as mercenaries to go and find some people and take some shit. She says they stole it from her first. You're like, whatever, right. You're paying me, okay, I don't care.
Right, but what I'm getting at is you're still playing this same campaign, right?
Yeah,
you've gone. I know you've gone through different characters. We talk about the retirement thing, but the mechanic, but we don't need to. But my point is that this has been one continuous game for you, right?
Yes, one continuous game.
And
the
game
itself.
And how long have you been playing this one campaign?
Well, it's now the end of April 2019. We started playing in October of 2017. And at first it was a little sporadic when we could meet to play, but for the last year I've played almost once a week. The game is made up of 95 scenarios. Each scenario is a dungeon run. It is a small kind of self-enclosed game. You're not going to play every single scenario in the game. Certain scenarios are closed off when you go a certain way.
And listeners, when he's describing scenarios, if you've ever played World of Warcraft, I've said that those scenarios in the games are very similar to instances in World of Warcraft. They are relatively isolated events that have an impact on the bigger, larger game. Continue.
Right. So that is how that's how the game is structured. Essentially, about once a week, I get together with my players and we play through one more scenario. What's nice about this game is that it scales very well. Each scenario can have a maximum of 4 players and a minimum of 2 players. There are ways to play the game in single player, but it's not as fun. Essentially, it's one player controlling 2 characters, whereas normally one player controls one character. It's their character.
And considering what we were talking about when we were saying why board games, the idea of being antisocial with a board game, it doesn't make sense. Why would you want to do that?
Right. I've played some games in their single player version, and it's honestly just complicated solitaire. It's not. It's not. And
I would go back and say, look, if you want to play an RPG by yourself, go play Witcher 3 or go play Skyrim, because those games are designed to cater to a solo person to be in their sandbox to get lost by themselves. They are the video game equivalent of reading a really, really good book.
Right.
But Gloomhaven is not that. Gloomhaven is a really good book that you are experiencing with other people.
Right. Collective choose your own adventure. But what is nice is because each scenario can scale well, we don't need to have all the players present all the time. As long as there's 2 players, and I will always play, right? Like the game lives at my house, so I always.
He's
play.
He's not joking. When I go to this man's apartment, in the very first thing you see on the right hand side, right as you walk through his door, is a table that already has this big board with all these different cards and stat sheets and everything set up right there. If I didn't know any better, it would look like a D&D campaign with a nice board that somebody had made. Right,
yeah. It does look a lot like that. And the reason we leave it set up is because there's so many different components. Obviously. It would take so much time.
I know how long it takes to set up War of the Ring, and this is probably way worse.
Right. Each scenario already takes between 3 to 5 hours, sometimes a little bit more depending on the complexity of the scenario. And then you have elements of the game that happen both before the scenario and after the scenario. I usually dedicate at least 6 hours
so if you were going to do... So let's do some quick math. Would you say that you do about one scenario every single time that you guys get together to play this?
Yeah, there's been, I think, maybe 2 occasions where a scenario was so short that we actually were like, screw it, let's just play another one because we have time.
Have there ever been any playthroughs where you guys haven't done one of these scenarios?
No. We've always been able, all right, so can't really...
So let's do some math. You said October 2017.
Yeah.
And then once a week. So how many weeks are there in... It's 4 times 12.
It's not always once a week, but I would say, there's 52 weeks in a year. We're probably playing at least 42 weeks out of the year.
So 42 playthroughs is what you're saying that you've done
per year.
Per year. And you've been playing now, so the full year of 2018... tack on another what are we in May now, so 5 times 4 is 20, so you got 62 and then we got the end of that one, which is another 3 times 4, which is 12, so you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 different playthroughs. Multiply that out by 3 to 5 hours. That's how many hours that you've been playing Gloomhaven. And the thing is, I'm not judging you. I can't possibly, because if you look at my Steam library, how many hours I've clocked in, the last one I looked at was Warhammer 2, that I've got over 800 hours clocked in on that. But would you say, because I know Gloomhaven is not a super cheap purchase, but would you say that you've gotten your money's worth out of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're still not done. We still haven't unlocked all the things you can unlock. Even considering the scenarios, even considering the parts of the game that are permanently closed, we haven't unlocked all the characters. We haven't experienced all of the things that we can experience still, that we can still experience. I mean, even with how expensive Gloomhaven is, and now you can find the base game for about $200 on Amazon, maybe a little bit less. But I'm obsessed with this game. It definitely has not gotten old. I'm still very much looking forward to unlocking new parts of it. I pre-ordered the expansion on the very first day that you could pre-order it. Still waiting for that expansion, but it should be coming ideally sometime this month.
That $200 price tag might seem intimidating to people, but you guys got to remember, Chris isn't playing this game by himself. So whatever number of hours that actually is it's going into the game, you got to multiply that by however many people he's been playing with. Now, I know everybody doesn't play the same, doesn't play every single week. I know you guys got a rotating thing going on. But as someone that hasn't played, and I'm telling you that I'm first in line to be in your next campaign. Because I told him, I'm like, listen, I played enough RPGs. I don't want to jump into this campaign when it's halfway through. I want to be there right at the beginning, and I want to experience the whole story. So I told him, not thinking that it was going to be 2019 and he's still playing the same campaign. I said that thinking that like, oh yeah, this will go on for a couple months and then we'll be done. But no, now I know for sure that like the next time you guys play one of these crazy campaigns, I want to be first in line.
Yeah, it's you know, the wonderful thing about this game is that there probably won't be a hard end. We have a small expansion coming out. The original game was 95 scenarios. We've got an expansion that should be coming any day now with 20 scenarios. And then he's already working on a much bigger expansion, more of a part 2 rather than an expansion to the same game. You told me
this one, yeah.
That will be just as big as the base game.
Well, when you guys get to part 2, you'll encounter this new wandering mercenary that joins your party.
Yeah, and as I've played, I think I'm the only... Maybe Rod Michael too, but he doesn't actually get to play that much anymore. His schedule just doesn't work. I think
that fool's also getting married. Congratulations, Rod.
Yeah. So, for good reason, he can't really play that much, but I'm the only player that's been there since the beginning. Like any mercenary band, this fits both functionally and thematically. Like any mercenary band, you have mercenaries that drift in, and you have mercenaries that drift out. So...
I wish I could remember some of Braun's quotes, but one of Braun's quotes would probably fit perfectly with that. That guy is a wellspring of great ones, and they have a really good actor playing him in Game of Thrones too. It's kind of sad that I really did enjoy that show when it was still following the books. Mm-hmm. It makes me wonder like how good the show could be and I know I haven't seen the latest episode, and I know people are going to be emailing me with spoilers and stuff, but I just know that there's been a sharp decline in quality ever since the books ended and the show kept going.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I mean, there's some amazing things about the show, but...
The casting is definitely, in my opinion, some of the best casting that I could think of. I think the only... Going from a book to some sort of cinema, I think the only casting I liked better was Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, because that was fucking perfect. I didn't even know who Viggo Mortensen was before that movie, but he was fucking perfect as Aragorn.
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of things that the show did well. Battle scenes, right? There's something viscerally better about watching a battle scene
versus reading it. Yeah.
Versus reading a battle scene. Like, there's nothing like seeing... 60, but with special effects, like 600 cavalry charge, right? Like, that's not something you can't get the same effect of by just reading that description.
Hell, that was the only reason I went to go see the Hobbit movies, because I wanted to see the Battle of Five Armies. And sure, it was epic, but, it was a little too epic in places where it didn't make sense.
But, yeah, so... But a lot of the things that are beautiful about the books and the early seasons of Game of Thrones, because they took them from the books, is the dialogue. Just those like amazing pithy lines where you're like, that's such a good line.
But that goes back to the casting, because like to hear Peter Dinklage deliver Tyrion's dialogue is gold.
Yeah, it certainly is. But the new seasons, last season and this season...
But they don't have the dialogue. They're writing the dialogue themselves now.
Yeah, it's just not
And they're not George R.R. Martin.
Right.
Because George R.R. Martin wrote some unbelievably good dialogue. If you guys like the show and have not read the books, do yourselves a fucking favor and go read those books. That will be a good 3 months minimum of your time spent reading those books. They are fantastic. Well, Chris, this has been absolutely wonderful. You have been probably I knew you were going to be the guy, but you were the perfect guest for me to be on here. And what did you think? You having fun right now? You having fun?
Absolutely. I feel like we've kind of touched like the tip of the iceberg on a lot of different topics that
I agree.
We can dive more deeply into. But I think that our guests. Bringing on other guests will allow us to do a deeper dive into each one of those things. And just for our listeners, I know that we kind of jumped around a lot of topics, and we didn't want to make this a really structured podcast. We wanted to make it more of a free-flowing conversation, and just give you guys kind of a taste of what it'll be like. It'll just be a lot of, talking about nerd culture.
Well, because we did get real deep into some things. We got pretty... Well, actually, no. We did kind of more or less touch on Starcraft, but we did get it deep into Gloomhaven. And
I can get really deep.
Okay, relatively deep. I guess It depends on who you're talking to here, because after all, nerds are nothing if not deep into certain topics.
There's my girlfriend, it's kind of a running joke. It's like an inside joke between us. Every time I'm kind of just staring into space, daydreaming and not really engaging, there's a 70% chance that I'm thinking about Gloomhaven.
You know that meme, right? Where the guy is laying on his side and he's looking over and he's like, I think she's thinking about other girls, and then the guy's thoughts are about something completely different.
Right. That's it. Every time I'm just kind of staring off into space, just daydreaming, 70% chance about Gloomhaven. I just can't
probably the other 30 is something work related, because there's always something that needs to be fixed and something that needs to be done when not even just at your bar, but at every bar. There's always something that needs to be fixed and something that needs to be ordered and something that needs to be done.
Right. But listen, there's plenty of things that we will talk about and like to talk about. If there's anything that you listeners want us to talk about, that you are not already hearing, any questions you want addressed, we are more than happy to talk about those or address those. Andrew, where do you want the listeners to send their questions, comments, concerns, all of that?
Oh, you're being the host now, and you're doing a wonderful job. So here's the deal, guys. I'm just getting all this set up for the very first time, but I do have a Geeky Bartender podcast available, or a Patreon page for it. The podcast is going to be available on Stitcher. It will be uploaded to SoundCloud tonight. And I will also be uploading a recording of this to YouTube. So, Geeky Bartender for everything. Whenever you're Googling it, Geeky Bartender or Geeky Bartender podcast, and you'll find it. Except on my YouTube channel, that is my personal YouTube channel, KT Vindicare, because that is my alias, that is who I am, that is from World of Warcraft. If you guys are listening to this now and you recognize my voice, that's not Andrew, that's KT Vindicare. So, we're going to have to come up with a code name for you. But that'll be available tonight or tomorrow. There will be a Patreon page for subscribers. If you guys like what you are listening to, I would love any amount of support that you can give me, that you can give this handsome gentleman. And that would be great going forward. But any emails, any sort of thing that you guys want to ask us about, any guest requests, if you're listening and you want to be a guest, shoot me an email at thegeekybartender@outlook.com. That is going to be my official email for this podcast. And dude, I'm looking forward to so much. We've got a full season of guests, of people that I've invited that have said that they want to come on, and the first few are going to be amazing. We got Derek coming in next week, so it'll be around the same time. I really hope that you can make it.
Yeah,
because it'll be so much more fun if you were here talking to him. Cool. And if you guys don't know Derek is the host of the Long-Winded Spiel podcast, and you can catch me and Chris on that one, and he did that one back in 2017. And if you guys want to know just how geeky we can get about bartending, there's plenty of that going around. There's plenty of wonderful stories that maybe we'll be repeating on this podcast at some point. But yeah, so that is going to conclude the very first episode of the Geeky Bartender podcast. I hope you listeners enjoyed it. I know that we enjoyed creating it. Chris, if you have anything that you want to plug before we go?
No, just, see you again next week. This is Chris Raba signing off.
All right. Well, that's going to do it. Thank you for listening, everybody, and I hope you guys have a nice day and stay geeky.